The call I made at 2:47 in the morning was the only one they allowed me. I could have dialed an attorney. I probably should have. Instead, I pressed the number I'd memorized without meaning to. Somewhere between filing quarterly audits and scheduling meetings, I wasn't invited to attend. He answered before the second ring finished. Cross. No groggy edges, no confusion. Jasper Cross sounded exactly the same at 2:47 a.m. as he did at 9 on a Tuesday morning, which meant he either never slept or slept so lightly that waking up was indistinguishable from being awake. It's Hazel. I kept my voice flat. The CBP officer who'd walked me to the phone wasn't far, and the room didn't have good acoustics for discretion. I'm in secondary screening at BWI. They flagged something in my carry-on. I need someone to pull the chain of custody documentation on the external drive registered under the Hargrove Asset Inventory file. Third drawer of my desk. It'll clear this up. A pause, measured and precise, the way everything about him was measured and precise. Are you hurt? Of every question he could have asked first. What drive? Why are you at an airport at 3 a.m.? What exactly is on that drive? He asked if I was hurt. I didn't know what to do with that, so I filed it away with everything else I didn't know what to do with when it came to Jasper Cross. I'm fine, I said. 40 minutes. He was there in 31. I had worked for Jasper for 4 years, and in 4 years I had built something close to an art form out of being invisible. I wore gray. I pulled my hair back. I kept my voice low in meetings and my numbers precise, and I had learned early on that the most powerful person in any room was the one no one thought to look at twice. I made his world run. Freight billing reconciliations, offshore holding structures, quarterly compliance filings carefully constructed to say everything and reveal nothing. I booked his flights. I made sure the right numbers appeared on the right pages, and the wrong ones disappeared without leaving a seam. By any reasonable measure, I was a forgettable woman doing forgettable work. And I had been quietly building a case against the Aldridge Group for 6 weeks without anyone asking me to. 3 weeks before the airport, one of Walt Aldridge's freight managers, a man named Curtis, sloppy and complacent the way people got when they'd been untouchable too long, left a laptop bag unattended at the coffee counter at Harborside Terminal. Our dock supervisor brought it to me because he didn't know who else to call. I copied the drive before returning it. I didn't have a reason, exactly. I had a pattern, a shape in the billing data I'd been watching for months. Certain freight charges moving through Aldridge's accounts, and then reappearing, clean and unremarkable, in contracts that overlapped directly with ours. They were billing under our terminal codes, using the cross-maritime name to move freight we hadn't authorized, then pocketing the differential. I had the proof on a drive in my carry-on bag. I had been flying to DC to deliver a copy to a contact I wasn't supposed to have, as a failsafe, before I put it in Jasper's Monday briefing. That was the part that was going to be harder to explain. He appeared in the terminal the way he always entered a room, without announcement, without the performance of arrival, like he had simply always been there, and you'd only just noticed. Dark overcoat over what looked like the remnants of a business dinner, collar open, no tie. His driver, Tate, materialized behind him like a shadow that had learned to walk upright. The CBP supervisor took one look at Jasper and made the kind of calculation men in uniforms made when they saw other men whose suits cost more than a monthly mortgage payment and who moved like the concept of being refused had never occurred to them. The paperwork cleared in 11 minutes. I walked out of the secure area and he was standing at the edge of the corridor, watching the hallway behind me. He looked at me the way he looked at a balance sheet when the numbers didn't add up. Not angry, not confused. Quiet and very, very focused. Hazel. My name flat and low, a question phrased as a statement. My flight was at 11:55, I said, to Reagan National. On a Thursday. I'm aware of what day it was. His jaw shifted, walk with me. Tate kept his eyes on the road, and the privacy divider went up without being asked. I sat on one side of the back seat, and Jasper sat on the other, and for a long moment the only sound was the highway and the particular kind of silence that builds when two people have too much to say, and neither of them is going to say it first. I was cold. I hadn't admitted it until the car's heat started working against me, making the cold in my hands and shoulders more obvious by contrast. Jasper noticed before I did. He shrugged off the overcoat without comment and dropped it across the seat between us. "I'm not cold," I said. "You're shaking." "Adrenaline." "Put the coat on, Hazel." I put the coat on. It was heavy and warm and smelled like cedar, and something understated that I had never once let myself think too carefully about. I pulled it tighter than was strictly necessary. "The drive," he said. "Yes." "Explain." So I did. I told him about the pattern in the freight billing, about the Aldridge Group's port contracts siphoning revenue through our terminal codes for 14 months, about Curtis and the laptop bag and the copy I'd made, about the 6 weeks of analysis I'd run on my lunch breaks, building a complete picture of how Walt Aldridge's operation had embedded itself inside ours, like a parasite that had learned to mimic the host. About the DC contact. I was careful about how I described her, and the backup copy I'd been trying to create before I brought any of it to him. Jasper listened without interrupting. When I finished, the car was quiet again. "You've had this for 6 weeks," he said. "I wanted it to be airtight. You were going to put it in my Monday briefing." Between the Port Authority renewal notices and the Q3 receivables summary, I confirmed. It seemed like the right place. Something moved across his face. Not anger, something more complicated and quieter, that I didn't have a word for. "How bad is it?" he asked. "The billing fraud alone represents about $2.3 million in diverted revenue over 14 months. I kept my voice even. "But that's the smaller problem. They've been routing freight through our terminal access codes that isn't in our manifest system. Which means, if anyone audits the chain of custody documentation on those shipments, the liability traces back to Cross Maritime before it traces back to them." The car got very still. "They set us up," he said. "They created the conditions under which we could be framed," I said. "It's a distinction, but it matters legally." He looked at me for a long moment. "You flew to DC to protect me." I looked out the window at the highway lights blurring past. "I flew to DC to protect the company." He let that sit between us. He knew I was lying. He took me to his building, not mine. I had worked for Jasper for 4 years, and I had never been above the 14th floor. The elevator to the penthouse was glass and city. All of Baltimore spread below us in orange and gray, and I watched our reflections in the doors and tried to decide which version of myself I was going to be for whatever came next. The building's doctor wrapped the wrist I'd wrenched when a CBP officer misjudged the space between me and a table during the initial screening. He checked the bruising along my ribs where the same table had caught me on the way through. "Deep tissue contusion," he said, in the careful tone of a man paid very well to be professionally incurious. Jasper stood across the room with his arms crossed while the doctor worked. He didn't leave. I didn't ask him to. When the doctor was gone, Jasper poured 2 inches of scotch into a glass and brought it to where I was sitting. I took it and drank it like medicine. He sat across from me and looked at me for a long time. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight," he said. "I have deliverables on Monday. Then you'll deliver them from here." His voice left no room for argument. "Aldridge has people watching the Port District. Until I know how much they know about what you've been sitting on, you don't move without me." I thought about arguing. I didn't have the energy. "You'll need a better chair in the back office," I said instead. "The current one has no lumbar support." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but in the direction of one. "I'll handle the chair." By the next morning, I had rebuilt my full working files on a laptop tape brought from my desk. Jasper made calls I deliberately didn't listen to from the far end of the room. We worked in the same space the same way we always had, except that now, for the first time, I could see the whole board. Over coffee, I put the plan together. "Walt Aldridge will know Curtis had a security incident," I said. "He'll assume a competitor breached the data. He won't assume it was his counterpart's CFO doing forensic accounting on her lunch break. That gives us a window." I set down the cup. "Terminal 7. Jasper went still. "Aldridge has been falsifying safety inspection compliance reports for Terminal 7 for 2 years. The Coast Guard inspection sign-offs they've been submitting are for a terminal that hasn't been fully inspected since 2022. I kept my voice flat. If those records go to the right desk at Sector Baltimore, they suspend the operating license pending a full audit. That's their primary import terminal. 60% of their revenue. Jasper set down his pen and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, like he was recalculating something fundamental. And for the sit-down, he said, "You offer Walt a contract." I leaned back against the kitchen island, ignoring the twinge in my ribs. A cargo handling agreement on the Eastport dry dock facility. Frame it as a concession, acknowledging their presence in the district, extending goodwill to prevent escalation. Walt's old school. He needs to bring something back to his people to prove he has leverage. He'll take it. The Eastport facility is being decommissioned, Jasper said slowly. Army Corps of Engineers preliminary review is next month, I confirmed. The decommissioning order hasn't been filed publicly yet. It's buried in municipal infrastructure records. Walt won't know until after he's accepted the contract and told his crew he squeezed you. By the time the filing goes public, the Coast Guard investigation will have advanced far enough that starting a war over a zoning document would make him look completely erratic, I said. He'll cut his losses. The apartment was completely quiet. Jasper Cross stood up slowly. He walked around the island until he was standing in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to hold his gaze. 4 years, he said softly. You've been sitting outside my door for 4 years. I'm very good at my job, I said. Your job just changed. His voice dropped to something low and deliberate. You're done in the outer office. My heart did something I wasn't going to name out loud. I'll need my own desk. You'll have the whole floor. The sit-down with Walt Aldridge happened in the private room of a downtown steakhouse. Thick walls, no reservations required if you knew the owner. Jasper went. I stayed. Before he left, he asked me how to play it. I was fastening his cufflink, a habit I'd developed over years of noticing the things no one else in the office noticed, and I kept working while I spoke. Walt's coming in humiliated, I said. He'll try to reframe the billing discrepancy as your people surveilling his operation illegally. Don't engage with the accusation. Acknowledge the tension, offer Eastport, and give him 60 seconds of chest thumping before he takes it. I smoothed the cuff. Didn't pull my hand back immediately. He will take it. He's been running the same play for 20 years because it's always worked. He's not a creative man. He just needs to believe he won something. Jasper looked down at me, the particular way he'd been looking at me for the past 18 tours. Like I was a locked thing he was only now finding the combination to. And if he pushes back? He won't. I finally looked up and met his eyes. Trust the numbers, I said. He held my gaze for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then, I'll be back before midnight. He was back by 10:45. Walt had taken the contract. The Eastport decommissioning order hit the public record 11 days early because a reporter at the Baltimore Sun got a tip from a junior staffer at the Army Corps office who was supplementing his income through freelance consulting. That was the part no one could have planned for. Jasper's phone lit up at 9:17 on a Thursday morning. Tate knocked on the inner office door 2 minutes later. I was already running contingencies on my laptop. He'll retaliate, I said before Tate finished explaining. He can't do another sit-down. That would be the 3rd time he's been outmaneuvered in 2 weeks. He'll move on the warehouse district. I pulled up the freight map I'd been using as reference. The Camden Yards corridor are 3 primary warehouses there are where the most liquid cash flow moves through. If Walt's people know what they're doing, that's their target. Jasper was already on his feet. Pull everyone off the south side, he said to Tate. Warehouse corridor only. Lock down the blocks. Nobody moves without my explicit order. He turned to me. His eyes were completely dark and completely steady. You stay in this room, he said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolute. Lock the door. You open it for no one but me. I reached up and touched his jaw before I fully understood I was going to. Don't miss, I said. He left. I locked the door. I am not a person who waits well. I sat at the mahogany table and stared at the freight maps and thought about everything I knew about Walt Aldridge's financial infrastructure. Street operations ran on liquid cash. Accessible, movable, ready. If Walt was mobilizing men, he was pulling from his primary operating accounts, the same ones Curtis's files had given me detailed routing numbers for. I had never filed a suspicious activity report on behalf of anyone, but technically, as a financial professional, I had a legal obligation to report suspicious transactions when I observed them. And what I was observing right now, in the transaction records I'd spent 6 weeks analyzing, was suspicious. The Bank Secrecy Act was very clear on this point. The SAR filing took me 23 minutes through the FinCEN e-filing portal. I documented the specific structuring pattern I'd identified across Aldridge's primary accounts. The automated system flagged the accounts for immediate review. Standard procedure triggered a hold pending active investigation. Walt Aldridge's operating accounts went into mandatory review status within 40 minutes. I hit submit and listened to the city outside the windows. The door unlocked at 11:14. Jasper walked in. His jacket was ruined. A long tear across the right shoulder, the pale lining showing through like bone. There was dust in his hair. He set his keys on the desk and looked at me across the room. "We're held corridor is clear," he said. "They didn't get inside." I know, I had the scanner on. Something moved across his face. Aldridge's men pulled back early, about halfway through. The ones who didn't scatter outright dropped their weapons and walked. "They weren't getting paid," I said. "Their boss's accounts went into mandatory federal review about 40 minutes into the operation. No access, no transfers, nothing." Jasper stopped in the middle of the room. "You froze their accounts," he said. "I filed a suspicious activity report as required under the Bank Secrecy Act," I said. "Walt still has the money. He just can't touch it during the 90-day review period." I paused. "I didn't steal from him. I just made his army stop getting paid long enough for them to decide the math wasn't worth it." Jasper crossed the room slowly. Not the way he moved when he was in motion. Contained, purposeful. Something slower than that. He stopped in front of the table and reached across, and took my uninjured hand and pulled me, gently, up from the chair until I was standing in front of him, close enough to count the dust on his collar. "You bankrupted his operation," he said quietly, from inside a locked room. I corrected a compliance oversight. He put his hands on either side of my face, and looked at me the way I had spent 4 years, pretending not to notice him, looking at other things. The way he looked at information that changed everything, that he was never going to let go of. "Seifer," he said quietly, like he'd been holding on to the word. "That's not my name." "It is now." He kissed me, not carefully, the way a person kissed something they'd stopped pretending they didn't want. I kissed him back, and somewhere below us the city went about its business without any idea that the woman who had spent 4 years filing reports in the outer office had just quietly redrawn every line that mattered. Monday morning I walked into the Cross Maritime building in a dark blazer with my hair down. Not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to. Tate held the elevator without being asked. Jasper was already at his desk when I came through the double doors of the inner office and sat down at the mahogany table where the real books lived. "Aldridge's accounts are frozen for 90 days, I said, pulling the first ledger toward me. "Which means their port expansion is effectively dead in the water. There's an opportunity in the Dundalk terminal leases if we move in the next 3 weeks. Jasper looked up from his screen. He looked at me the way he had in the car, in the airport, in the quiet hours of his apartment. Like I was something he was very glad he hadn't solved sooner, because solving it early would have cost him something he hadn't known yet that he needed. "Show me," he said. I opened the ledger. The most dangerous person in any room is the one no one thought to look at twice. I had known that for years. It had just taken Jasper a little longer to figure out that I wasn't the exception to that rule. I was the proof of it.